Please be seated.
Muito bom dia. Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Morning. Bonjour. Bom, je sais pas comment dire en arabe. Salam alaikum. Nós damos boas-vindas à senhora Presidente da Assembleia da África do Sul, Sua Excelência Nossi Viu. Também damos bom dia e especial ao nosso Presidente Chief Charambura e a nossa Presidente da Rede das Mulheres Parlamentares. Bom dia muito especial a todos vós que estão aqui nesta sala para darmos continuidade às nossas atividades. Ontem tivemos a sessão de abertura com belíssimas apresentações de várias conferencistas e com uma participação muito ativa das nossas participantes. Temos aqui conosco também deputados, a quem saudamos, porque a questão do empoderamento da mulher e inclusão na governação não é uma questão apenas das mulheres, é uma questão coletiva da sociedade e os homens devem fazer parte. Devemos estar todos juntos para que essa construção seja sólida e que as mulheres sintam essa solidariedade dos homens. Posto isto, vou passar a palavra à nossa convidada especial, a senhora Presidente da Assembleia da África do Sul, do Parlamento da África do Sul, para proferir a sua mensagem de solidariedade para as nossas participantes desta conferência. Muito obrigada. Tenha bondade, senhora Presidente.
Thank you very much. The moment I heard Malibongo, I just knew you were here. And then I started looking around and I didn't see the chief whip. So I saw her walking in. Thank you very much, colleagues. And Chairperson, Madam Lucia from Cape Verde. Lucia Passos from Cape Verde. President of the PAP, Honorable Chief Charumbira. It was a long way for you to get to that seat. True. And I can assure you that my team worked very hard for that.
Thank you.
Esteemed members of the Bureau of the Pan-African Parliament, esteemed members of the Pan-African Parliament Women's Caucus, who I've just met, honored guests. Let me start by congratulating all of you for ensuring that you have a successful, I see Philomena, Ambassador Philomena, yes? And I'm sure there are many other ambassadors I may have missed here. You are all acknowledged. Now, I'll tell you a story about Philomena sometime. This is one of those who hosted us during the bad days. Philomena was working at the OMA offices in Angola, Angolans women. And Philomena is one of those who received us. Philomena is one of those who literally did everything for those of us who lived in exile in Angola at the time. I'm happy to see you, Madam Ambassador. I'm really honored. Honorable members, thank you very much for inviting us to share just a few words with the Women's Caucus of the Pan-African Parliament on the occasion of your Women's Conference. I should start by apologizing for my absence yesterday. You may be aware that yesterday it was one of those sessions where the President appears in Parliament 4 times a year, once a quarter. So when the President then attends Parliament, I usually make sure, it's tradition, that I be there and I'm the one who presides. So it was a question and answer session. And I must say it went very well, colleagues. Please clap for us. I'm saying this because yesterday I read from comments on TV, and people were saying, oh yeah, we're going to a circus once more, we're going to see the drama and what, and they were really looking forward to drama. And the drama did not occur yesterday. It was so peaceful, amazingly so. I don't know why. So it was a good sitting. Although South Africa has become a home for the Pan-African Parliament, allow me still the opportunity to welcome the delegates to this conference and assure you once more of our highest consideration and hospitality of our people and our state. And as I raise this, I must say, honorable members, we had at some point difficulties where there seemed to be uncertainty about whether the Pan-African Parliament will continue in South Africa. And we had to go all out, even address the Bureau of the African Union to reassure the heads of state that you are safe in South Africa, that you are protected in South Africa. The incidents which occurred here inside the chamber where we have no control over. But whatever else, you've had peaceful sessions in South Africa, and we continue to commit ourselves because there were reasons why our heads of state then decided that South Africa should host the Pan-African Parliament. It's a very historic, it was a historic occasion when it was agreed that we would host the Pan-African Parliament. And I do want, once more, President, to make this appeal that when an incident occurs, it's just important for us to let us know so that we deal with that. But it does not mean that it's an attitude of the people of South Africa that people who attend the Pan-African Parliament feel insecure. We don't want that. I want to assure you that the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa, that the government of the Republic of South Africa continues to be committed to hosting you in this chamber. Now, we continue, therefore, to feel honored as host nation of the seat of the PAP on behalf of all the people of the continent. Because this was not a decision which was taken light. It was not a decision which was taken by South Africa. It was a decision which was taken by heads of state of the continent. So we take that responsibility very seriously. Chairperson, this Conference on Women sits at an opportune moment, at a time when the world is grappling with reorganizing itself to respond to the wide-ranging socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The post-COVID-19 recovery is not going to be about some isolated pockets of interventions to return to the world of normality and reignite economic growth. But it will be a total reimagination of our society as we know it, and a new world order. In addition, the recovery is also going to take place in the context of a new technological age, the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, which I believe will not be that far apart from one another. The technological advance into the age of artificial intelligence, a highly digitized economy, and expansion of knowledge systems will usher in an unprecedented disruption of the way our society is organized, including its social relations. This is an important opportunity for the aspirations of women, the gender struggles, and the women's empowerment movement globally. For far too long, our continent's women and girls have suffered the twin challenges of women oppression and poverty. In a continent that has so much potential to harness for qualitative economic and social development in all. In fact, the very exclusion of women and the skewed development focused on young girls is the reason why our own ability to harness such a potential remains limited. You know, honorable members, you are here at a time when we've just finished the gender-based violence and femicide summit, which was convened by the presidency for 2 days, consisting of government and civil society. Very important dialogue. It was our second dialogue. First one was in 2018. But what to me matters there is that civil society is able to engage directly with government, not via other people, not through memorandums, but directly with government to understand what the government thinks in trying to resolve the many, many cases of gender-based violence in South Africa. And I think it was a very informative session in that sometimes when you are sitting there, and maybe when you are not directly affected by some of what we have seen, we now had an opportunity to actually see the faces of many women on the screen who have died in South Africa, the faces of many children who have been murdered, some of them 3-4-year-olds, and therefore what it means is that you are here just at the right time for you to have a deeper understanding and the nature of the challenges which we have as a country. And those challenges cannot be solved by women alone. Those challenges cannot be solved by government. Those challenges need society to come together because women's rights are human rights. And for all of us to engage and find a solution moving forward. Now, in the context of opportunities brought about by the post-COVID-19 recovery and the fourth industrial revolution, the biggest threat to Africa harnessing such potential will be gender inequality. This threat also represents the biggest missed opportunity for our continent's growth and development prospects. Chairperson and Honorable President, of course we must note that much progress has been made by the continent, not only to reverse the impact of gender inequality, but also to prepare itself to benefit from the advantage of increased participation of women in leadership and in the economy. But I don't know if you, honorable members, have noted this. We've noted it in South Africa. Whereas we see the rise in numbers of women in politics, in the National Assembly, in the National Council of Provinces, and of course civil society in general. But when you go to the corporate to the boardrooms in the corporate world, you see that you do not find a good or a sizable number of women in those boardrooms. I don't know why. I don't know why corporate is left behind. Because that's a critical area of decision making, where it talks about issues of economy and how best to empower women to also come in, break the ceiling, and gain access to the resources which they have. And this is one of the things I think we should, as women, really discuss, because I think we need to assist the women who are in the corporate world to ensure that the boards of these companies have sizable numbers of women, because anyway, you'll find that at the bottom, amongst workers, your majority will be women. But right there, in the hierarchy, you will not find them. So the continent must get to a point where we say, we want, all the corporates in the country, we want X percentage of those to be women. Of course, we are not talking about women who are not competent. We are talking about women because we know amongst ourselves, we do have women who are competent. We do have women who can run the corporate world. Over the years, since the establishment of the African Union, our continent has shown commitment to promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women. From laying the necessary legal framework and instruments to our own declaration of 2010 to 2020 as the African Women's Decade. Mother Africa has shown great strides both in addressing women, the plight of women, and growing representation and involvement in decision making. We've seen it, colleagues. We see it every day. The pace may be slow, but what is important is we see now in politics a number of women really going in. I observed when we attended the IPU 2 weeks ago, that the majority of speakers in some of the regions are women. The majority, SADC, has a significant number of women speakers. East Africa has a significant number of women speakers. So we're doing well. But what is important is for us now, how do we utilize the responsibility of being the heads of our assemblies in ensuring that we monitor? Because I think for me, that's the programs are there. There are so many legal instruments. But what is important is, do we monitor? And having monitored and exercise our oversight authority, what do we do? What directives and instructions do we give to those who are supposed to put some of these structures in place? Nearly all of the members of the AU, and by extension this Parliament, have now ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, while more than half have ratified the African Union's Protocol on the Rights of Women in our continent. In this regard, as far as demonstration of real commitment, Africa's leaders are not doing very bad. In fact, we compare favorably against many other continents in this regard. I've seen it at the IPU. The theme this time was about gender equality, gender whatever. And IPU is how long now? 100 and what years? President? Whatever the years. Whatever the years. But I've observed that we as the African continent are doing better. We are doing well in terms of representation of women in leadership. But they talk. I mean, you listen to very militant women from Europe, they talk. They are very good at it. But walking the talk is another matter. A number of their parliaments, if I may say, and women in cabinet and in the cabinet does not necessarily consist of the women in the majority. So Tina, we are beginning to walk the talk, and that should encourage us to pet our presidents even more, to say, go on, continue, because this is what we need in our continent. It's not for the countries we are in, it's for the women of the continent. Now, despite this, however, the quality of life amongst many Africans, especially women, has not improved for the better. Women continue to struggle to break into any jobs, and when they do, majority are still employed at low-skilled labor and unsupported informal market and other dangerous and unsafe conditions. The wage gap for paid work between men and women continues to widen. If there's any picture I dread to look at even now, it makes you feel good being a woman, because it shows just how resilient, strong and resilient you are. But on the other hand, it shows the face of poverty of a woman. You know that picture which you'll say, footage you'll watch on TV, where you see there's conflict, there's war somewhere, the men have decided on a fight somewhere. You were not there. And then you see scores of women carrying blankets and sheets with their entire collection covered there. And one child at the back and 2-3 others on the sides holding them. That picture, when I look at it, I always say, you know what? As women, we are very strong. We are very resilient. But we deserve that? We do not deserve it. That's not what we should be getting. Because in the first instance, we are never the first ones. We never take decisions on war, because we appreciate and understand what war does to women and children. People will take decisions on the war, and at the end of it all, the people who feel the brunt and the negative impact of a war are women. Hence, the demand by women that with regards to peace, reconciliation, peace efforts, the women should be at the forefront, because we feel the brunt of the war more than the men. According to statistics by the Global Partnership for Education, women are responsible for 60% of work done globally, yet earn just 10% of income, and own just 1% of property. In Africa, 70% women are excluded financially. The continent has a US $42 billion financing gap between men and women. I'm not sure if that is fair, but I'm sure in your discussion, so you will agree with me, it is not fair. Chairperson, around the world, gender equality needs the political will it deserves for women to attain meaningful progress on girls' and women's rights. It is important, therefore, that the continent and the global community moves beyond just demonstrating commitment and take measurable actions to rid ourselves of all barriers to women's and girls' participation in socio-economic development of their nations and the continent. The role of parliaments in exercising oversight over the role of governments in promoting gender equality is critical and has to be consistent. In this regard, the role of parliaments becomes very important, for it is in parliament where the duty to ensure accountability for our plans rests. Without a strong system of oversight and accountability, all the plans, commitments, and treaties will remain a pipe dream, and that will never be realized. In the absence of strong activist parliaments, including a more empowered PAP, we run the risk of failing future generations, and plans and goals such as the SDGs and Agenda 2063 will never be realized. In addition, it is also going to be important that women are involved in structures of decision-making, including in leadership. If women issues are to be prioritized in both national and continental development agendas. At the recent assembly of the IPU, the 145th years in Kigali, Rwanda, one of the things I raised seriously was the concern that monitoring reports of the IPU itself show that we still have member nations who have 0 to 5% women representation in their parliaments. I mean, we've seen it. We sit there, we are over 1,000. But when you sit down and do a breakdown, you realize that, man, actually, there are parliaments which are still 0. And sometimes it's those which call themselves advanced democracies, which will have 0 numbers or even 1 or 2 members. And those of us who are still developing and running slowly and trying to catch up, we have nothing to catch up because they have the theory, but they are unable to implement. They don't walk the talk. So we called for the IPU to consider action, penalties, really, against such members. And I believe it may become necessary in the near future to sponsor a draft resolution for the consideration of both the PEP and the IPU. I don't know if that is the same here at PEP, Honorable President. I hope not. I've seen quite a number of women even on TV. And I really hope we will not be forced into a situation where one day even the Pan-African Parliament would have to sit down and really scrutinize itself and look at possibilities of imposing penalties to countries which do not send women to a session of a PAP. While on this subject, Chairperson, let me once again take the opportunity to recognize and congratulate the nation of Rwanda for continuing to lead globally when it comes to efforts to ensure women representation in their parliament. Now, come to think of it, this is a country which emerged from the ruins of genocide, where millions of people were maimed. And when they decide that they are going to start, there's peace, there's reconciliation, they are now going to start rebuilding. One of their key priorities was to put women at the helm and say the women must be in the majority, because they understood that, of course, the people who really felt the heat even more, it's women. It is women. The fact that you lose your entire family, the fact that you lose your children and you don't know where they are, we know that a number of them ended up growing children, ended up growing in other countries such as the US, the UK. They were scattered all over the place, not even know where their parents are. So it is the women, ultimately, who feel the brunt of whether a civil war or a war intra-state or whatever it is. And for that, I think we should be grateful that yesterday we saw here in South Africa the past few days that there were efforts to bring together, to find peace and make peace between Ethiopia and Tigray. We welcome that, and let us pray, all of us, that that will be sustainable. It will be a permanent peace. Now, Rwanda was also hosting this session of the IPU, and had its main theme being the issue of women's representation in decision making. Lastly, let me also report that the IPU, the Africa Geopolitical Group, elected a woman to chair the geopolitics. We elected a Tanzanian speaker, a young lady, young lady with great potential. And that is the woman now who is leading the African Geo Group within the IPU. But another significant step which we took was the speaker from South Sudan, the lady speaker from South Sudan, convened us and hosted us on a dinner, and hosted the East African group of speakers and the South. We were just having dinner, wining and dining. Please let me know when my time is over. Don't hesitate. But what was of significance in that wining and dining is that we ended up saying, well, ladies, we're here. We are sitting here together. We are part of this whole big crew. And there are issues which affect us directly now as speakers as well, women speakers. So why don't we let's form a forum of women African speakers, and then we bring into that forum women members of parliament. So when you attend the forum, you bring 2 young or 3 young women who are parliamentarians, because we are preparing to hand over. The transition should be smooth. And we agreed. And when we agreed, we said, okay, we'll launch it. When do we launch it? We don't know when we launch it and where we will launch it. But we want to launch it as quickly as possible, because we want to form the nucleus, and then we invite the other women speakers from the rest of the continent, because this was just an idea which came up as we were enjoying ourselves, that ladies, let's organize ourselves better as women speakers. So I am hoping that that forum will be a legacy of the current women speakers, who one day people will look back and say, oh, shame man, they formed a forum because they needed to strengthen themselves, and they also needed to capacitate the younger group of women leaders who are coming behind us. Of course, I suspect of the group there, I think I'm probably the oldest. I'm probably the oldest. I heard some of them saying mama, and I looked at myself and I thought, yeah, I think I'm not, yeah. So in fact, I think the one who's the leader of the geopolitical group, I actually think she was born in the 70s. And I looked at her and I thought, yeah. She's slightly older than my son, my firstborn. So it's good. It's good, because even the one who took the initiative to invite us to this dinner where we had this discussion is a young woman from South Sudan. So ladies, let's hang in there. Somebody said the sky is the limit. I think it's going beyond that now. We're not saying the sky is the limit. We say it goes on and on. It can't be the sky. Now, these are some of the positive steps we are taking to ensure that as women parliamentarians, we support one another. We listen to one another. We reflect and share our own experiences, and moreover, help one another to improve gender equality in our parliaments and in our governments at large. It's very important, colleagues. You know, when you enter a space which usually is dominated by men, it can be very rough. I know, because I was a Minister of Defense in this country for 8 years. When I left last year, it was my 9th year. The one thing you get when you attend these meetings, now you are sitting now as Ministers of Defense, then the guys will give you a look, and the look really will be saying, are you supposed to be sitting here, or are you supposed to be sitting with the admin staff? And then the next thing you'll hear, Ministers of Defense, we want a caucus, and then when you follow, are you supposed to be? Not in so many words. No, they won't say it, but you'll see the look. And then they'll be so suspicious of you until that time when the moment comes and you open your mouth and find that sometimes your views are better than some of the views expressed by those who have been there for many years and who have been dealing with issues of defense. So there is that. But we're not pushing for this space because we want to overpower or we are desperate for power. No, but when it is given to you, then you have to make a meaningful impact. Now, I've seen it even with generals who are women. You come into a department, you see there are women soldiers, there are male soldiers, but when they talk about active combat, women are always, in the past it has always been about supportive roles. It's not about supportive roles anymore. The women want to be there right in the forefront because they know and appreciate the importance of protecting their own. So I'm just saying the same applies to women in energy, women in mining, women even in international relations. There was a time when that was a space, a domain of men. And now we find several women in the continent actually who are ministers of international relations. Let's carry on, girls, and let's support those heads of state who have taken it upon themselves to ensure that young black women should be empowered. Now, Chairperson, we are presented with an opportunity in this changing global economic order to use gender equality to propel positive change, growth, and development for our continent. As the world experiences a rapidly changing global context, let us harness these opportunities to prepare the world for a future that is completely free of gender discrimination. Now, we're not going to be able to do that if we do not discuss openly issues of gender-based violence, even at the workplace, sexual harassment at the workplace. Because half the men, when they see you, they don't see you as human being who is normal, who is capable. First, they see a woman, and I'm sorry to say this, sometimes, therefore, a sexual object. And we're not. We are women, and we are very proud women. We've gone into consciously into politics, not because we are sexual objects, because we want to do the best for our communities. And I would want women, young women are talking now on these matters. I like it. Young women are beginning to speak on these matters. They are standing up. But you see, if you allow that, and the state does not take responsibility of protecting or ensuring that there is justice when such crimes have been committed, then you are going to find this situation where women end up retaliating and women end up in correctional facilities. The other day when I was in a panel at the gender-based forum, this one which was here at Kalaga, I said to colleagues, you know, I had an opportunity some 11 years ago to be a minister of correctional services. And when I went in there, I was scared. I was frightened. I didn't know what to expect, you know. All I knew was that I'm now going to be working with inmates and I'm going to be going into the in and out of the cells, and I don't know what to expect they will do to me. But by the time I left, I think it was 2.5 years later, it was one area I did not want to leave, because I felt I had identified a niche for myself, and that is in the main dealing with young inmates and women inmates who give birth in correctional facilities by establishing mother and child units. But I'm raising this because I want you to take note of the fact that, at least in South Africa, the majority of women who are serving long sentences in our correctional facilities are women who were subjected to gender-based violence in their homes, families, by their husbands, by whoever, and some of them are young people who grew up being violated in the communities where they are. And those are some of the things as women parliamentarians, when you are deployed into an area, a correctional, don't hesitate, go. Because there are things you will not know which are happening there behind those closed doors, behind bars, which are happening to women. And you will never understand the story of a violated woman until you have had a session and you talk to the woman and understand the genesis of her challenges. So it's one thing, one area I would like you to encourage to be. We're not saying women should take the law into their hands, but we are saying if justice is done speedily and if women feel protected, then some of the incidents that we read about and see will not happen. They happen because at times the wheels of justice are very slow. So, as I take leave, Chairperson, as the world experiences a rapidly changing global context, let us harness all opportunities available to us to prepare the world for a future that is completely free of gender discrimination and exclusion of women and girls. Africa, and indeed the world, are at the brink of change, and women should be at the forefront of such a revolutionary change. I thank you, honorable members.
Uma salva de palmas mais forte para a senhora Presidente.
A huge applause for the Speaker of the Parliament. Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you very much. You summarize on what we have discussed yesterday here in this chamber, and today she approached all the topics that we will be dealing with during this session, except the COVID topic. So I believe that our speaker will have some difficulties not repeat what she has said, because she spoke what the gender issue is, the rights of women. She spoke, and very well, of the women's empowerment, of several women's empowerment aspects, demand, and also she made a outline of what has been the meeting of the Kigali, and we took good note, Madam Chair. So what the Pan-African Parliament will do in relation to the oversight of the recommendations from the Kigali's meeting. So our President attended that meeting, and we will follow up together with the Gender Committee on Family that is in charge to give this leading, but also the Parliamentary Network will also follow up these recommendations. Madam Chair, I'd like to say that when you spoke about the women's participation, when you said that there's a 0 to 5 women representative at the Parliament, our Parliament has taken a decision And here, once again, I welcome you, Madam President of the Gender Committee, that is leading the process to represent the Parliament in this session in a resolution in order to allow the committee to draft the parity law that will be a continental law that will allow all countries that do not have the parity law to work on this issue. So we know that this is a hard, a complex issue, but we are touching on the sphere of power. Unfortunately, men, they don't want to leave their comfort zone. So when we are talking about parity, here we are talking about, we will have on the balance on the distribution of the portfolios on the decision-making bodies, whether at political levels, but also on the leadership of the public institutions. So participate on the government decision body, the public institutions. These create some uncomfortable to men because they think that they are the only one that they must hold these positions. So this is what we have to do. We need to show to our society that parity is a matter of a human right. This is not a nation that the women, they want to be in on the leadership, on the front line. No, this is a matter of equilibrium. This is a collective issue of the society that we need to see so that it will enable women to have opportunity to participate in policy, to influence measures that promote the gender equity. If we want to have a better education, a better health, women more empowered, they need to be in the front line. And I will take note that about when you spoke about the forum that will take place. So we are happy to know that the forum is wanted to make the transition of a generation, and that's very important. Having women, young girls that want to participate in politics, and women that are already in the politics, even those ones that are not in the age, that are above 60 years, we can also make this transition. The legacy, we need to be in solidarity. So the president of the Pan-African Parliament, yesterday, he stated that he doesn't know the story of a woman that he has make transition process. So this is a positive aspect that will help us to have a support from the society so that we can have more involvement or more engagement on the political decision-making bodies. Now, let's go to our second panel. But before that, once again, let's a round of applause to our chairpersons because he gave us a good equity, gender equity lessons. Now we will follow Madam please don't leave your seats. We will just adjourn the meeting for a few minutes, and then we need to consult with the Madam Chair whether he will still keep still be here with us or not. So then we'll have a family photo with the Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, or we can make a family photo with right now. Okay, now let's go for family photos. Let's go outside where we normally take the family photo so that we can take a chance with the presence of the Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa. So let's break for 10 minutes. Then after the family photo, we'll come back here so that we can resume our presentation. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Applicants. Yes, that's what we do. A shortlisting. We do a shortlisting now. Today is shortlisting. And then there's a deputy clerk over 300 applicants. They have reached out of more than 12. And take out all. Yeah.
Charter on People's and Human and People's Rights. The African Charter, which enshrines political rights in Article 13.1, which provided that every citizen shall have the right to participate freely in the government of his country, either directly or through freely chosen representative in accordance with the provisions of law. These rights are complemented by the right of every individual to receive information and to express and disseminate his opinion within the law. The right to free association, the right to free assembly, and the duty of state parties to establish and improve appropriate national institutions on the promotion and protection of the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Charter. Hence, one of the objectives of the Charter on Democracy is to promote the establishment of the necessary conditions to foster citizen participation, transparency, access to information, freedom of the press, and accountability in the management of public affairs. The Charter on Democracy also recognized popular participation through universal suffrage as an inalienable right of the people. To this end, it requires state parties to reaffirm their commitment to holding regular, transparent, free, and fair elections to ensure fair and equitable access by contesting parties and candidates to state-controlled media during elections, to establish independent and impartial national electoral bodies, to adopt a binding code of conduct governing legally recognized political stakeholders, government, and other political actors prior, during, and after election. The African Charter, on the other hand, enshrines political rights in its Article 13, which provides that every citizen shall have the right to participate freely in the government of his country, either directly or indirectly. Now on women and governance, good and democratic governance promotes open, efficient, and consistent participation of women in all levels of policy making. Promoting democracy and the rule of law is a process that cannot go further without the involvement of women, especially in politics. Women's low participation, political representation is therefore often used as an indicator of gender inequality and bad governance, especially the proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments. As you may be aware, women are underrepresented not only in the political sphere but also in decision making within the private sector. In addition, it is critical to stress that women are not a homogeneous group. Certain groups of women are particularly vulnerable to marginalization from both political representation and full access to rights and citizenship within democracies, including developed countries. So now concretely, what is the role of the Special Rapporteur on the rights of women in Africa in promoting women in governments? The Commission, and indeed its mechanism of the Special Rapporteur, have made many strides in advancing the rights of women in policies on the continent through their working modalities, namely, first, state reporting procedure, which will be discussed in details at a later stage. For the purpose of this panel, it's important to note that states parties have an obligation to report to treaty bodies regarding international and regional treaties, of which they are party to. State reporting serves as an effective means for states to reflect on the implementation of the rights contained in treaties at a domestic level. In this case, member states of the AU have the obligation to report to the Commission on Human and People's Rights, and in compliance with its Article 62 of the African Charter and Article 26 of the Maputo Protocol, as well as Article 14 of the Kampala Convention. The reporting obligation, therefore, encourages constructive engagement with the Commission, thereby making it a useful tool in monitoring state parties' implementation of human rights obligations, including commitments relating to political participation. The Commission also, in the framework of state reporting, reviews shadow reports prepared or submitted by accredited NGOs and national human rights institutions. The shadow reports are taken into consideration by the Commission when examining or reviewing the state reports. There are guidelines on shadow reporting which were adopted recently during the 72nd session of the Commission and launched 2 weeks ago at the 73rd Ordinary Public Session. I must not fail to mention the other forms of innovations that the Commission had demonstrated in relation to its state reporting mechanism. While the Charter is silent on what should constitute the content of such report, the Commission has drawn up elaborate guidelines on this. There are also guidelines on reporting on the Protocol of the African Charter on Women's Rights, Maputo Protocol, which have been adopted by the Commission to assist state parties on reporting issues related to women's rights. So the first point was state reporting, and now let's move to promotion missions. The Commission undertakes promotion missions to state parties to monitor the human rights situation in various thematic areas. Therefore, during missions undertaken by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, the latter generally advocates for ratification of the Maputo Protocol and specifically calls on states to ensure a quota system that takes into consideration women's equal representation in politics, including in parliament. The third point is the communication procedure under Article 45 of the African Charter, which mandates the Commission to ensure the protection of human and people's rights. Under this mandate, the Commission receives and considers complaints or communications alleging that a state party to the African Charter has violated the rights guaranteed therein. The complaint or communication procedure of the Commission has contributed immensely to human rights protection in Africa. This is because the Commission, over the years and in the process of examining or reviewing communications, has developed a system of norm clarification and standard setting, which can otherwise be referred to as quasi-judicial activism. The communication procedure of the Commission has therefore become an essential component of the Commission, the African human rights system in general. And the Commission is increasingly depending on this procedure in exerting its protective mandate. Now finally, resolutions and declarations. Another area in which the Commission has demonstrated commendable innovations is resolutions on diverse human rights issues and situations, sometimes as they affect specific countries. These are formal expressions of the Commission's opinion in relation to the relevant human rights issues, similar to the practices of the UN, the EU, and the AU itself. Its resolutions are adopted and released to the public. In conclusion, there is a relationship between democratic governance, women's experience, and the advancement of gender equality. The process of democratization requires respect for human rights and observance of the rule of law and good governance. These are the principles upon which both the African Charter and the Charter on Democracy are founded. The effective and coordinated implementation of these instruments will without doubt strengthen democracy, good governance, and lasting peace on our continent. All that is required is the political will of member states. I therefore call on member states to ensure gender-just governance, which includes men and women, as democratization that fails in incorporate a gender perspective is flawed governance. The participation of women in political processes is instrumental in fostering democratization and gender-sensitive modes of governance. If democratic governance is to be compatible with and advance women's rights, it should not only embody a greater presence of women in formal politics, but more fundamentally, it should acknowledge, be sensitive of, and responsive to the social and economic disparities between men and women. And I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed, for your adherence to the allocated time. Thank you for this speech. And let me invite Mrs. Biwa Mangawiro to talk about the roles of women in the promotion of good governance.
allow me to stand on existing protocols. Allow me to stand on existing protocols as I look at the role of women in the promotion of good governance in Africa. And just to start this is the need to understand that while good governance, there are various definitions that have been given to what good governance means, but it is about ensuring that policies and public institutions in a country respond to the needs of citizens. These broadly cover political and voice dimensions at citizen level, how collective decisions are made, and how citizens express their preferences. It is also about public sector institution dimensions, integrity and accountabilities of the executive branch of government, and it also about legal and anti-corruption dimensions as well, guarantee of human rights and individual liberties, and protection against misuse of power for private gain. And so in the absence, where there is an absence of good governance or where we have poor systems of governance, these often result in widespread discrimination related to sex, race, color, religion, and political opinion, and many other forms of discrimination that I may not have included here. And looking across the world and also looking into our own continent in Africa, there's a persistence of pervasive gender disparities that continue to exist. For instance, women and men do not have equal levels of political representation. Economically, employment and career structures in the public and private sectors tend to favor men above women, and also service delivery systems are discriminating, and services are often more accessible to men than to women. And the net effect of that is that women suffer many types of discrimination, including legal, political, economic, and socio-cultural forms of prejudice. This also leaves them particularly vulnerable to corruption. And corruption is detrimental to gender equality and is a barrier to women's gaining full access to their civic, social, and economic rights. Although the link between corruption and women is not yet fully understood due to limited research in this area, women are at greater risk of extortion in public service delivery. And secondly, the corruption women experience can also have a sexually abusive nature. And corruption, whether financial or sexual, has far-reaching consequences. There's far-reaching consequences for gender equality, sustainable development, and democratic governance, and the realization of the full commitments such as Agenda 2063, which becomes very critical that corruption is challenged, and women have an important role to play in fighting corruption. Greater participation of women in public life can help in the design of gendered approaches to anti-corruption, which can also prevent corruption experienced by women. This also allows for women to resist corruption, report it, and seek redress where it occurs. Also, increasing gender inclusion in political and economic spheres can also break up the male-dominated collusive networks, resulting in strengthened democratic institutions that are known to reduce corruption. So in this regard, as parliamentarians, you can advocate for gender mainstreaming into anti-corruption policies, strategies, and frameworks, including the implementation of gender-sensitive reporting and redress mechanisms. You also have the opportunity to advocate for collection, analysis, and dissemination of gender disaggregated data on public service delivery and corruption, including on sexual abuse, also referred to as sextortion. You can also recognize and address sextortion as a form of corruption and ensure the justice system can receive, investigate, and prosecute complaints effectively. You also have the opportunity to promote access to information so citizens, and particularly women, are more aware of their rights, what services they should expect, and how to report corruption. Support the participation of women in public and political life, making available financing for women's electoral campaigns, implementing gender-sensitive policies, and and procedures in Parliament and adopting a zero harassment policy and corresponding grievances and redress mechanisms for women in public life, because we know that while we advocate for women's empowerment and women's participation in decision-making spaces, women in these spaces are also still prone to facing various forms of abuse that also tend to hinder their ability to fully execute their functions. Women are powerful change of agents, often encouraging others to take action to assert their rights, strengthen their communities, and protect the environment. They have led in the development, advancement, and protection of fundamental human rights from time immemorial, from calling for women's suffrage, equal rights and opportunities in public and private life, resistance to injustice. I mean, in South Africa, every August we celebrate Women's Day, which is a commemoration of South African women's 1956 march against the pass law, which is a demonstration of women advancing women's rights, women fighting for good governance and democracy. And also women have been in the forefront of calling for the inclusion in decision-making processes, such as in peace building and conflict resolution processes, which have culminated in critical international instruments, such as the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 in supporting resolutions. And more recently, we've seen movements such as the hashtag #MeToo, which expose the gross sexual and gender-based violations that women and young girls continue to experience across the continent and across the globe. In political and decision-making spaces, women contribute to redefining political priorities, placing priorities on the political agenda, which reflect and address women's gender-specific concerns, values, and experiences, as evidenced even by their increasing calls for a gendered lens in understanding and addressing the impact of climate change. We know that often in such spaces, women are excluded, yet they bear the brunt of the effects. And if we are looking also at phenomena such as climate change and calling for climate justice, women have been on the forefront of calling for a gendered lens, of calling for inclusivity, which is still pushing the boundaries for good governance. However, in spite of the crucial role that women play in promoting and protecting their rights and advancing democracy, their participation in public and private decision-making spaces, it's still lagging behind. Yes, we have made some strides, and yes, we have countries such as Rwanda who are leading by example globally, but still we are not yet there. Women still remain lagging behind. And in spite of the many international and regional instruments on advancing women's rights, implementation still remains very poor. I mean, my predecessor did allude to some of the instruments that we have on the continent, but we still have implementation poor, or we still have countries here that have not yet ratified the Maputo Protocol, yet it's a very fundamental instrument that is very context-specific to our realities as African women and pushes the boundary even further than some of the international instruments that we have on advocating for women's rights. Sexual and gender-based violence remains rampant on the continent, with an estimated 1 in 3 women having been a victim of GBV. Female genital mutilation remains high, with an estimated 55 million girls having experienced or at risk of the practice here on our continent. And child marriages and teenage pregnancies also remain very high on the continent. Yesterday we had the president here speaking about the challenges of child marriages and teen pregnancies in our communities. So as parliamentarians, it is critical that you enact regional and national laws that promote, protect, and advance women's rights. I mean, there's an opportunity to call for member states that have not ratified the Maputo Protocol to do so. And there's also the opportunity to enact regional instruments such as the anti-FGM bill in the EAC region. Also, effective implementation of laws and policies promoting and protecting women's rights through the creation of instruments that are well-resourced. Often we hear of how our leaders speak about the existence of laws and policies, but these are often not well-resourced. These are often not well budgeted for. And for us to be able to ensure that women are effectively included and participating in democracy spaces, we need to have institutions, we need to have laws and policies that are well-resourced and that are well budgeted for. And also it is critical to hold the executive accountable to uphold and protect women's rights and citizens' rights in terms of our different various constitutions and legislations. And it is also important to monitor effective implementation of laws and policies by organs that are mandated to do so, as well as promote state collaboration with other stakeholders such as civil society and business sectors in advancing women's rights. Also, gender-responsive institutions are essential in promoting and protecting women's rights and promoting democracy. This is particularly essential in post-conflict situations where the legacy of conflict remains long after the peace negotiations have been made. It is critical that judicial reform and democratic processes take into cognizance women's experiences and needs needs such as ensuring that abuses to women's rights are criminalized and more equitable laws and policies are put in place for the advancement of the well-being of all citizens. In this regard, it is crucial that laws and policies that promote equal access to political, social, and economic opportunities are enacted, effectively implemented, and monitored. It is also important to promote women's participation in decision-making, including supporting financing of women's electoral campaigns, because we know that it's very expensive to contest in political and in election processes, and often lack of funds serve as a hindrance to women's ability to run for public office. Yet, as has been demonstrated, women play a very crucial role in the realization of democracy and good governance on our continent. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا Mrs. Biwa.
Thank you very much.
For 6 MP, because actually we are running out of time. So from Chad, Honorable Mohammed Yusuf. From Chad, Honorable Mohammed Yusuf. The speak will be for 3 minutes. Thank you. Yes.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I would like also to thank the Chairperson of Women's Caucus. The role of women in enhancing good governance is extremely important. It can't be realistic to imagine any good governance without women. Women represent more than half of the world population. So let me recommend something with regards to reinforcing good governance. First, building on others' experiences as well as the universal values and human values is important and extremely useful. The fight, the struggle, credibility of women also is important. Women cannot always depend on the issue, on the matter of quotas. Now we need to see, to make sure that we have new ideas and not always refer back to the issue of quotas. I think that gradually, progressively, when it comes to making decisions, we need to let this idea of quotas aside and be more innovative. Now, we need also to recommend that women also build on or draw on upon our African values. We cannot import everything. If we were to take some useful, universal, international values, it's okay. But we need also to build on our own African values. Because this is our nature, and we need to make sure that our values are upheld and championed. Sometimes women are even better than men in some positions, in some fields and sectors. Therefore, we need to have what we call affirmative action when it comes to some positions and some status for women. Thank you.
Mananisu, Republic of, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, Republic of South Africa, Mrs. Jean Mananisu. She's out? Okay. So, Gabon, from Gabon, Honorable Bilogu Marie Jolie. Gabon?
Oui.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, for giving me the floor. I would like to firstly thank the authorities at the Pan-African Parliament for having invited me to this very important meeting of giving and receiving. And I would like to say that the recommendations coming out of this conference must be put into action. I don't have a question per se, but I did want to share something with everybody here, share the experience of Gabon in terms of good governance, women in good governance. One of the speakers spoke earlier about women being important vectors for change. And this I agree with completely. And some women acquire skills and capacity in their positions of leadership, and they use these skills and capacities to empower others and to also have their own rights respected. There is no doubt that the full participation of women in politics, economics, education, etc., is fundamental to democracy as well as to sustainable development. And it is true whether a country is in times of peace, war, or conflict. Women play a very important role in development and, of course, in governance. Their participation should be increased, and it would be if we focused a lot more on the education of women. Women have played a key role in Africa, and there is a lot of experience that can be shared in Africa. And in my country in 2009, women played a key role in the political transition.
Merci. Cette transition.
And in this time of transition, we knew no conflict. It was completely characterized by peace, consultation, and respect. And I believe that was greatly due to the participation of women. And we need to be inspired by this experience in Gabon and include women more in political, social, and economic affairs. Some female leaders in politics and civil society have managed in our country to push through reforms, and they have pushed through reforms in terms of our laws, our legal code, criminal code, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. And now from Côte d'Ivoire, Honorable Dayara Madjara. From Côte d'Ivoire.
Je suis là.
Good morning.
Madame le Président.
Let me first thank the two speakers for their brilliant presentations. I have two questions. The first one goes to Dr. Mohammed. As far as the regulatory frameworks for the promotion of job and investment opportunities in favor of women. Regarding the enforcement of these laws and implementation of these policies that we have to implement in our national parliaments in order to avoid any kind of gender discrimination. This is my first concern. The second one goes to Madame Piwa regarding the fight against corruption. What are the principles of the rule of law? What is the link between the rule of law and democracy? This is my second question. Thank you.
Thank you. Now from Djibouti, Honorable Safia Djabil. From Djibouti, Honorable Safia.
Je suis là.
Yes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, for this opportunity. First of all, I'd like to thank all the presenters we've heard from since yesterday and who enlighten us on various themes that are of interest for us as women. I'd like to say good morning to all our guests and the honorable members present here this morning. Well, this is not a question, but rather a comment, because in this kind of meetings, we need to share our experiences and our success stories that will enable the other participants to learn from. Let me recall here that women do not have to demonstrate their skills. If we were to be based on quotas, as it was rightly said by the honorable member of Chad, we will be waiting for very long. But I think that the most important thing is to demonstrate and show their skills and competences in order to hold a place at the decision-making institutions. I would like to say that all these chairpersons of sessions in my country are women. Anti-corruption agency in my country also is chaired by a woman. The agency in charge of security and budget control also is chaired by a woman. So when it comes to the National Assembly in my country, the women entered the National Assembly in 2002. We had only 7 women, and now we've got more. And this is thanks to these first 7 women who showed and demonstrated their skills and competencies. Therefore, we noticed the capability of women and the value added of women within our national agency. Now, we have reached a number of 65 women parliamentarians. In the government, we had only 1 woman in the government, as I said, but now we have 23 members of the government. This is to say, dear friends, dear sisters, that we should not wait for the quotas policy or system. We need to reflect for our sisters in the university back home. Majority of students are girls, and they succeed in their studies. And I just wanted to share this experience, this success story, and I hope that it'll be taken on board. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much.
The last one will be from Honorable Grace Sikh, Republic of South Africa. Grace, Honorable Grace. Honorable Grace.
Thank you, Chair. I think my input will be on the legal, regulatory and policy framework. Thank you.
Now we will take 2 minutes with Mr. Mohammed to comment and 2 minutes for Mrs. Piwa to comment and end the session. The floor is yours, Mr. Mohammed.
شكرا جزيلا السيدة الرئيسة. Je vais m'exprimer en français.
Thank you very much for your inputs and for your contributions and for sharing good practices. If we were to retain something from yesterday's and today's discussions, I personally retain that there is almost a consensus, unanimity in favor of promoting the right of women and their participation in governance. However, a number of obstacles and impediments should be avoided or faced. I personally identified the following obstacles. The political will, this has been repeated since yesterday. Sometimes our governments lack some willingness and determination. Therefore, it is useful to make advocacy campaign, to lead advocacy campaigns by our women parliamentarians who are already playing an important role in this respect. The second obstacle is the bad practices that are persistent in our countries, respective countries, that through communication, sensitization should be addressed. And the stakeholders as well. We need to identify all the stakeholders and all the actors. And here I would like to draw your kind attention to 2 ideas. Since yesterday, a number of stakeholders have been identified, that is the MPs, the governments, civil societies, international organizations, the UN, the AU. I think also there's another actor that's interesting, that's the International Organization on Human Rights, that are in the middle of between the governments and international organizations. These are very important organizations that are well listened to by our governments, and they can play a major role in promoting women's rights. They should also contribute to address the 4th obstacle, that is the effective implementation of our policies and strategies. But here, to move from speeches and to implement our laws and to be more concrete, if indeed there are laws, there are policies, strategies that are put in place, but sometimes, as I said, there is a lack in political will, or there are some persistent stereotypes also. Therefore, and this makes that many countries do have laws and legislations that microphone, please, that guarantee these rights, but unfortunately these laws are not enforced because of lack of political will, as I said, or for the one of the impediments I've just referred to. Now, to conclude, I'd like to say that I'm honored for having taken the floor as a man after the President of Pan-African Parliament. I would like to say that promoting the causes and rights of women should be addressed by everybody, not only women, but men and women. Thank you.
Mr. Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed.
For 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll start by responding to the question that was asked in terms of what is the rule of law and what is the link with democracy. And just to say that, simply put, the rule of law is that no one is above, means that no person is above the law. It means that everyone is subject and accountable to the laws of the land, which are publicly promulgated and are equally applicable, and also such laws should align to internationally accepted standards. And when you link that with democracy, because when we're talking about a democratic state, we're talking about a place where citizens are able to freely choose their leaders, and also where their leaders are also recognized and respect the laws of the land. So that becomes a link there, and are also leaders who are also responsible for ensuring that citizens also recognize and respect the law. So that is how I would simply draw that link to say that the rule of law and democracy work together or work hand in hand. And then to just say thank you very much, honorable parliamentarians, for sharing your experiences or the experiences from your countries, and also for continuing to reinforce the importance of advocating and advancing women's rights, and also for recognizing the role, the important role that women play in good governance, in democracy, and in also being able to attain and create environments where we can realize the aspirations of Agenda 2063 and also realize the Sustainable Development Goals. And certainly enabling environments need to be created for women to be able to effectively and meaningfully participate, because when we talk about women taking positions of power, women being decision makers, we are not talking about tokenism. We are talking about creating enabling environments for women to be able to effectively and fully play that significant role and be able to fully contribute into the decision-making spaces and shape the priorities for our countries, and to be able to address some of the challenges that we are facing during this era. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا.
Very much.
For Mr. Mohammed and Mrs. Piwa, and I'm sorry for not being able to take the rest of questions, as we are really running out of time. And now we will move directly to the second session that will be chaired by my colleague, Honorable Victoria. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. We are really running out of time. Allow me to stand in existence of the protocols. But let me acknowledge Madam Amina Yaya, our chairperson, and all the vice chairpersons here present. All protocols observed. I'm here this morning to modulate on the legal regulatory policy framework that advance women's employment and investment, enforcement on gender, the relevant laws and policies, and ensuring compliance. Legal framework to encourage women entrepreneurs, access to trade and investment zones, investors, suppliers, and also the funds for capacity building of women entrepreneurs. This morning we'll be joined by Her Excellency Mrs. Erudis Furtado Monteiro, Secretary of the State in charge of the higher education from Cape Verde. My apologies if the pronunciation of your names. Is she around? Yes, please. You may join the panel here. Also joining us this morning is Marie Providence Mugagu, who is the Gender, Youth and Trade Experts, Directorate of Institutional Matters and Program Coordination, DIPC, from AFCTA Secretariat. Welcome, Madam. We are also going to be joined by Miss Margaret Corey. She's a Senior Program Associate, United Nations University, Vice Rectorate in Europe, UNU-VIE, born in Germany. But this one will be joined by Vision. Madam Wawa, are we ready? The third person will be joined us by Vision. Yes. Okay. So allow me this time around to give you, Madam, Your Excellency, Mrs. Erudi Furtado Monteiro. You may take the floor. Thank you. But while she's taking the floor, I don't have papers, names submitted for speakers after the presentation. Okay, we have them. Thank you so much.
Good morning to all of you. I'm from Cape Verde. I will speak in Portuguese. I would like to thank for this invitation and to welcome the chairperson of the Women's Parliamentary Network from the Pan-African Parliament. Also to welcome our moderator and also to greet the two colleagues that are alongside with me in this session. So the one that will be here in the room and the other one that will be attending the meeting virtually. I'd like also to welcome the Chief Sharumbia, the President of the Pan-African Parliament, and also to welcome the third Deputy Chair or President of the Pan-African Parliament, which is my colleague from Cape Verde, and also she's also from the my party, Dr. Lucia dos Passos. I'm here to share some reflections on the challenges to have a women power in a different political decision body. Just to make a small point of a situation, I'm from Cape Verde, a small archipelago on the eastern coast of Africa, close to Senegal, Guinea-Bissau. So we have 10 islands, one inhabited and the other one, no one is living there. So the small archipelago colonized by Portugal from 1462 up to 1975. Also, we achieved independence in 1975 after a strong fight, the liberation struggle, an armed struggle that was carried out from Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau was also colonized by Portugal under the leadership, under the leadership of Amilcar Cabral, that fought for the independence of the two countries, Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. And we achieved our independence in 1975. So since 1975 up to 1990, we had 15 years of governance of an Africanist party, which is the African MLSCP, that from 18 decided to be designated of the independence African political, because there was a separation between Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. So this party led Cape Verde during 15 years, and during the first 15 years of independence of Cape Verde, we had a government made up by men only, a government constituted by men only. And in that time, the idea of having women in government was something not well organized. So the party that was in power understood that the most important was to reconstruction of the national, and thinking of women is something that they should relegate it to the second plan. It doesn't mean that, although Cape Verde had independence party and assuming the power just with men, doesn't mean that all the political party that fought for the liberation of the African party have the same postures. For example, I can see the situation in Mozambique, in which we had Graça Machel, who was an icon of democracy in Africa, but also on the constitution of Mozambique after the independence of that country. So even in this stage, at the onset of the independence of African country, it was possible to have women in the government. But in Cape Verde, it was impossible, not because we didn't have qualified women, no, but that was justly because of the brotherhood, the perspective of the men who were leading our national independence process. Amilcar Cabral died in 1963, before the national independence. He had a different idea of women participation, not only on the achieving the independence process, but also on the reconstruction of the country, follow up the independence. He died, and the people who came after him, so the leaders and the men that succeeded Amilcar Cabral on the political and the party leadership, they have a different perspective, and they adopt these positions of excessive male on the structure in Cape Verde is seen and built by men, and there is also
Cape
Verde is a small archipelago, is a Creole country, is a mix of cultures. When the Portuguese came, they found a desert virtually. People were taken from the African continent, they went there as slaves, and some of them, including adventurers from Europe, were the first population. This is how the perspective of state started, but from a colonial perspective, from a masculine perspective. You had the master, who is the man, who is the father of the nation, and is representing Europe. Africa was only represented by the idea of the mother, the slave, in an inferior status. So this mixture of cultures was seen from this perspective. There was the father from Europe, the master, and the mother, the slave, who is inferior. And this idea persisted even after independence. So the colonial masters left and the archipelagos started being led by men. They were not white, but they were using the same power structure. That's why women take longer to accede to state structure, because a state in a small nation, in a Creole nation in Africa, is a representation of the colonial image, even if the state is led by men. So the colonial vision is also a masculine one. That's why we have a process that takes a long time for women to assert themselves. From the moment women take position in the state, there is a new issue that emerges. Who are these women who take positions in the state? So even here, the process is long until we reach women with major visibility, those who are the representatives of the Creole culture. This takes a long time. So we still have to think not only about the presence of women and men in the political power, but we also have to think about other dimensions. Representation by different races in small archipelago states, Creole states with mixed cultures that come from a colonial heritage. We have to think about the representation of women from a color or racial perspective. This is something that sometimes is not referred to in speeches in Cabo Verde because these are divisive issues. But the existence of divisions is a motive for us to address what are these processes that are making people silent and making people to feel excluded. Because women feel excluded from the political space. Those who are included will end up representing those who are promoting exclusion. So we have to know who are the women that accede to power and how are they representing such powers? What are the interests they are defending? How are they perpetuating the domination relations in small island states? So we have to think about this issue of participation of women. It's true, but it's also important that we have to start thinking not in a so romantic way of representation. We have to de-romanticize representation. We have to reach power with the same challenges. We are not part of a homogeneous category. Our interests are not similar, are not the same. So when we come to power, we don't come with the same perspective. We don't take the same position. There are women who come to power just to replicate dominance positions from men, and there are those that even when they come to power, they are silent or they are silenced. So it's important that the ways in which women come to power should be well defined and the way they occupy political space. I would like to draw your attention to this issue and also to talk about legal mechanisms that can contribute to change the status quo and to allow for a more pluralistic participation of women. Recently, I'm a university lecturer, I'm a researcher. Recently, I was part of preparing the parity law. The process was led by Dr. Lucia dos Passos, who is a vice president at the parliament. She was one of the ladies who was leading. She was the chairperson of the Women's Network in Cabo Verde. She was working with other women. At the time, I had an opportunity to work for a consultancy, and I was able to be a consultant in the preparation of this law on gender parity in Cabo Verde. This is the perspective. We will come up with a parity law to allow for more women to come to power, to parliament, to the executive, to local government. Well, we are not discussing even here the private sector. We are only talking about public institutions, public companies. This was the issue. If we want to come up with a law that will make it possible for more women to come to political space, we should also start debating the idea of diversification of the whole of the women. It's not only more women from different regions or from different walks of life, but they should have the possibility of having a legal backup so that they are protected when they come to the political space. This has to be discussed so that other categories of women come also to power. We have 10 islands, so the law is supposed to allow for women from all of those 10 islands to come to power. So the law will not only be a national mechanism, but its implementation will have to make it possible to go to even to remote electoral constituencies. So different women will have the possibility of coming to be part of electoral lists and to be part of the legislative bodies. And even for municipalities, this is the idea. It means that in terms of local government in municipalities, women will be part of election lists and of roles, election roles, and they will be part of municipalities. So this is also something that applies to government, so that there is also parity at the level of executive government, so that this parity also includes diversity, women's diversity, so that political powers have representation, not only 40% of women, but such a representation of women should be a reflection of national reality. Because usually when we think about women, we think about more privileged women. When I started working on these issues, I was inspired by debate on Afrofeminism, especially Afro-American feminism and some feminism in Brazil and Latin American. Because these are communities where race is a reality. You will ask me, Cabo Verde, isn't it an African country? Is it not a country of mixed races? So how do you raise this issue of internal difference in the continent? So colonial heritage is longer than colonization itself. Colonization came to an end in 1975, but reminiscences of colonial powers, those differences that were imposed by colonialism, are still there. Even if we say that we have a homogeneous society, racism is still there. Because people are not looked at in the same way. You have islands where this mixed color process was stronger. So diversification still makes sense. Even if sometimes these are not issues that are discussed. We have a diversified society, a multicolored society should be well represented. We have a strong debate, although Cabo Verde is represented as a homogeneous country where there are no racial conflicts, we have different mechanisms that have different consequences, especially for women. We can say that the black men in the country have already reached all positions in the power, but we cannot say the same for black women. So it is to say that racism is stronger when it comes to women. We cannot leave Cape Verde out of this debate on social inclusion and on the way how race is still affecting women's inclusion in on the continent. This issue can be raised in a different way from country to country. In my country, the issue of creolization produces a major difference when we talk about women. Being a woman, being a black woman is a factor. It makes a difference. And this difference is noticed even in political space. How can we change it? We can change it from the moment when more women from the black categories, the so-called black category, have access to power, and they take spaces with visibility, and they should also have a voice of their own, and they should be not reproducing or representing the dominance discourse in this process of social evolution. It's not all women that go through the same process when they come to power. It's not all women that live the same challenges when they have to have access to political powers. It's not all women who play the same way their roles, their political roles. So we also have to realize that we as women are not part of the same social category. We are not part of the same homogeneous category. Although our challenges can be seen as the same, our interests can be seen as the same, our fears, our allies, even when our allies are in power, those allies have different perceptions on women. So we have to think about the challenges that each group of women faces, precisely because there are women that even when they come to power, they are isolated. They feel lonely in the political space. So it's on this type of women that we have to think more and more. Being in a position of power doesn't mean that happiness has been achieved. To be in power doesn't mean that we have a voice that will be heard. If we have to come up with pressure groups, advocacy groups, and we have to value positions of women in political space, we have to look at these different experiences by women when they come to power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Madam Eldis Fundato Monteiro. This time around, let us welcome Madam Marie Providence Mugago.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, for Madam Chair,
Please,
for giving
Madam,
me the floor.
make sure you take 15 minutes. Thank you.
I will do my best. Thank you. Esteemed members of the Pan-African Parliament, esteemed members of the Women Caucus of the Pan-African Parliament, allow me to stand on existing protocols, but allow me to acknowledge my Honorable Amina Tijani Yaya, Chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament Women Caucus, and Honorable Victoria Kingston, Second Vice President of the Pan-African Parliament. I apologize, I think I may have mixed up a few things. So I seek your indulgence. Good morning. It is indeed a privilege to stand before you today, women pioneers, to talk about the legal framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area and its contribution to promoting women empowerment and inclusion. I bring you greetings from His Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, who is also a fervent champion of women and youth empowerment. I believe that my presence here today is a testimony to that fact. The participation of women and young people in the sustainable and inclusive development of the continent is not only an imperative, but is also recognized in several African Union instruments, including the Constitutive Act of the African Union, Agenda 2063 that was extensively discussed before, the Maputo Protocol, among others, and the treaty establishing the African Economic Community, otherwise referred to as the Abuja Treaty. The treaty provides a roadmap for the economic integration of the continent, and under its Article 75, member states agree to formulate, harmonize, coordinate, and establish appropriate policies and mechanisms for the full development of the African woman through the improvement of her economic, social, and cultural conditions. Women and young people make significant contribution to trade in several African countries through their involvement in the production of tradable goods as cross-border traders, small-scale producers, home-based entrepreneurs, usually in the areas of handicraft, garments, and food, in the services sector, mostly as informal and casual workers, and as managers and owners of firms involved in trade. The AFCFTA process is very much a process that has been led by women. A woman was responsible for the mobilization of resources necessary to enable the negotiations of the AFCFTA agreement in record time. The first female director of the Department of Economic Development, Trade, Industry and Mining of the African Union Commission worked tirelessly to organize the negotiations. Female chief negotiators, senior trade officials, ministers responsible for trade, all played a critical role in the realization of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Kindly assist me in appreciating their efforts. Let us appreciate the men as well, as they are very much part of the process. The agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, otherwise referred to as the AFCFTA agreement, is anchored on sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, gender equality, and the structural transformation of AFCFTA state parties. Under the Protocol on Trading Services, state parties also undertake to mobilize resources and implement measures to support domestic efforts with a view to improve the expert capacity of both formal and informal service suppliers, with particular attention to micro, small, and medium women and youth service suppliers. In other words, the AFCFTA seeks to create an inclusive trade environment in which women and young people can take advantage of cross-border trade opportunities. It's about expanding the customer base by accessing wider markets. It's about diversifying exports. It's about reducing production costs by sourcing inputs, including intermediate inputs, within the continent at a cheaper price. It's also about creating an environment conducive to cross-border investment by women and young people, protecting their intellectual property rights, and fostering the use of digital solutions to improve firm efficiency and competitiveness, and as well as the firm market reach. In order to broaden the inclusiveness in the operation of the AFCFTA, the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union decided to include the Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade within the scope of the AFCFTA agreement. The protocol does not seek in any way to replicate the provisions of existing legal instruments within the African Union framework, but rather to complement them by focusing on women as entrepreneurs, women as business owners, women as service providers and consumers, in order to enhance their impactful participation in intra-African trade and to promote their inclusion in value and supply chains. The President of the Pan-African Parliament yesterday asked a very powerful question: what is gender mainstreaming practically? The AFCFTA seeks to answer the question through the Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade. The protocol is a concrete effort to mainstream women and youth issues into the Continental Trade Agreement. The negotiations of the protocol will begin in the coming months. The Committee on Women and Youth in Trade, under whose auspices the protocol will be negotiated, has been established. In the spirit of inclusiveness, the AFCFTA Secretariat began preparatory work towards the negotiations of the protocol by engaging women and young people, not only about the constraints that they face as cross-border traders, but also about the solutions they would like to see in the protocol on women and youth in trade. It is about giving them a voice, about promoting their active participation from inception within the rules governing negotiations. The largest engagement that we had with women and young people was held in Dar es Salaam, where the AFCFTA Secretariat, in collaboration with the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, held an AFCFTA conference on women and youth in trade in November 2022 under the patronage of Her Excellency Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania and the champion of women and youth in trade under the AFCFTA. These engagements gave some insight into structural, economic, social, procedural, and financial difficulties that women and young people in cross-border trade face. They reveal that women and young people are not an homogeneous group, and that the development of coherent and inclusiveness-oriented policies should differentiate interventions and be accompanied by sound and robust implementation plan that building on existing policies, initiatives, and programs at the national and regional level. The outcomes of these engagements will guide the drafting and negotiations of the Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade to ensure that the protocol truly delivers the AFCFTA promise to women and young people. The AFCFTA is truly a catalyst for the economic advancement of women and young people, and by extension, their families and the continent in general. As you know, they say that when you empower women, you empower an entire nation. The success of the AFCFTA is a sure investment in women and young people of Africa. Allow me to use this platform to encourage representatives of AU member states that have not yet ratified the AFCFTA agreement to urge them to do so. As of November 2022, the AFCFTA agreement has been ratified by 44 African Union member states. In a nutshell, to conclude, the Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade is a one-of-a-kind legal instrument and one-of-a-kind and innovative legal instrument that seek to translate recommendations from consultations that were held for several months of women and young people into legally binding provisions that seek to improve their participation in intra-African trade. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Madam Providence Mugagu. Let us give them another round of applause, please. At this juncture, we'll be joined by Miss Margaret Corey from Germany. She'll do a presentation visually. Welcome, Miss Margaret Corey, to the Pan-African Women Conference. You may take the floor.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and greetings, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I'd like to say thank you very much for this opportunity to speak at this 13th Pan-African Conference on Women's Rights and the very important theme being addressed today on women empowerment and inclusion in governance. Today, I'll be speaking to a project that we're implementing called the Green Innovations Project, and it addresses the question of empowering African youth and women green entrepreneurs and innovators in Africa. And I would also like to take this opportunity to maybe share my screen as I'm not there in person, and it can allow for maybe better interaction. So if I can just get a little bit of feedback, I believe you can see my full screens, the full slideshow.
Are we able to see on the screen? Yes, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much. So just to explain a little bit what we do at the United Nations University, first of all, we carry out research on vulnerability and risk, and our research helps us to shape global policy with the aim of informing the UN system and specifically policymakers. We carry out our research, which is in order to present this scientific evidence, and we seek to generate tailored solutions for resilient societies in order to leave no one behind. In the long term, we strive for investing in the capacities of the next generation of thought leaders. And in that regard, we work with international research teams in over 13 different institutes around the world. And we focus on excellence in research and teaching and working at the interface between science and policy. This is where we're located. We're located around the world, as mentioned. And I would like to, first of all, start off my presentation by sharing this quote by our dear late Professor Wangari Maathai, who said, "You cannot protect the environment unless you empower people and inform them, and you help them understand that these resources are their own. They must be protected." And women are at the center of protecting our natural resources and also using them and leveraging them, for example, in agriculture for sustainable livelihoods. With that, I would like to share a little bit about the project which we are implementing. Yesterday, we had a lot about implementation. And what are we doing in this line? In Greenovations project, we aim to set up this framework that brings together stakeholders of the green innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa to identify and ideate solutions, organize and support innovators and entrepreneurs with a focus on youth and also, most importantly, women. Well, we know what is happening. For example, we had the statistics this morning of the gender gap that exists. But when it also comes to the question of entrepreneurship, we know over the between 2019 and 2020, for example, of the over $1.5 billion investment that was raised, and with over 250 closed deals based on existent research, we know that only about 35 deals were closed by women-founded companies. And while there should be an equal opportunity, theoretically, there's major disparity in the access to this capital and even mentorship and networking for women, particularly in the innovation and startup ecosystem. We also know that some different African countries are adopting startup acts, and we have to ask ourselves, to what extent do they take into consideration the gender needs, specifically for women in this startup ecosystem? Innovative solutions have important drivers for development and contribute to attract capital and investments, both regionally and internationally. We know there are existing platforms to support innovators and women entrepreneurs, but we're still falling short of platforms that really speak to support the needs for women. And in this regard, at the United Nations University and with our team at the Pan-African Cooperation for Education Technologies, we have identified key strategic sectors, green sectors, where we find that women are well positioned to expound on green jobs where they can be created, especially in the sectors of renewable energy, waste management, climate smart agriculture, climate action, and waste management, where women already are well positioned to engage in value-adding activities for sustainable livelihood. And this is quite important because while women are represented in some of these sectors, they're also underrepresented when we think about areas of higher impact. For example, when we think of renewable energy such as solar and wind, and these are some of the areas where we would like to strengthen the expertise and also bridge some of those gaps that we have been hearing in this conference today. For example, yesterday, we had there are about 134.7 years to meet gender gap, which is the highest compared to other regions. And these green sectors, despite the challenges they're in, present opportunities for women to reap higher-end benefits in the sectors where they're already engaging. And so how do we do it? How are we planning on implementing this within our project? Yesterday, there was strong advocacy for the importance of education, and as we have had the same today. So we start off from a space of assessment, and we've had the importance of data, and we all know what cannot be counted, what cannot be improved, cannot be managed sustainably. Therefore, we start with assessing and classifying African startups and innovations, and also looking at the mapping of actors with a focus on where do we have key women stakeholders and what are the structures for green innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem? How can we strengthen women and youth skills for the development of a knowledge-based innovations? And how can we set up a Pan-African green entrepreneurship incubator and acceleration framework so that when our honorable members want to implement an incubation setup for women, they can already have a template for them to rely on? How can we set up this Pan-African Green Entrepreneurship Accelerator and also a knowledge and policy hub? In this project, we also aim to respond key questions when it comes to women. We're asking ourselves, what are the specific challenges for women-led startups and how can we address those? And what are the best case business models for women-led startups in Africa? We're also asking ourselves, how can the ecosystem be adapted to support women entrepreneurs in these green sectors? We heard about the importance of culture and and also adapting our solutions based on the unique challenges in the different communities where our women are located. So in this project, we aim to support them from the ideation phase, the startup phase, to acceleration and scaling, even possibly, and even maturity, together with the partners who we're working with. And I'd like to really show you some of the information that we have today of some of the strategic areas where women can play a very important role when it comes to intervening and growing the businesses in this sector. For example, well, there's high participation and interest in solar home systems. We also see great opportunity and a great need for investment, for example, in clean cooking, in commercial and industry, and also leveraging women expertise in accessing funding in this renewable energy areas, especially from crowdfunding and their participation even in the mini-grid ecosystem. Women have the opportunity to participate even more strongly in the area of waste management. So far, there's a lot of participation in liquid and municipal waste, but we also see an opportunity in e-waste and solid waste as well. And a third example to present today is in the area of forestry. We all know Wangari Maathai was a champion for forestry, and in the drought that we have been experiencing this season, we've been hearing from communities who have gotten into planting trees and they have lost so many trees because of the prolonged drought. And it is the women who are caring for our forests and also engaging, for example, in practices of agroforestry. We also see opportunities in precision farming and smart irrigation, smart agriculture for our farmers to be able to adapt to this extreme weather events. And how are we planning on doing this more concretely, and also with a presentation to our policymakers and our different national partners when aiming to implement a green innovation framework in the different countries? So first off, we identify the needs in a reference incubator where women and youth would get training, mentorship, networking, infrastructure, for example, through the fabrication labs that we see in different African countries, and also advocating for seed funding and other resources that they may need, and channeling those different reference incubator programs in these different green sectors that we have identified, and leading to the creation of this green entrepreneurship policy and knowledge hub so that we can have interaction with different stakeholders. And we do bring in stakeholders given this quintuple helix approach which we have adopted and we continue to build upon, that brings together different actors in the form of a stakeholder alliance, and I welcome everyone to join, and I will share details on how to join this alliance, to bring in the different government institutions to understand funding from funding actors' perspective, how the funding that we're seeing, how it can then link and be absorbed by our youth and women entrepreneurs and innovators. Working with technology and innovation hubs, let us not forget academia and universities and the richness that they build, that they bring science and evidence of what they're researching and on the ground. And also, most importantly, the region and international development cooperation, and also the community actors who we work with. And just to give a little bit of evidence from other experiences that we have that are ongoing and we're still building up on, we have projects such as this with the Pan-African University, where we have designed and developed this mini online postgraduate program on mini-grid digitalization and entrepreneurship program, where we
Nós estamos a verificar na capacitação no continente, também dos negócios, e também de sermos capazes de utilizar esse conhecimento técnico. E mais recentemente nós implementamos a liderança em matéria dos programas climáticos e nós
and after taking this climate leadership course, we took them through another phase where they ideated solutions, climate solutions that respond to the local environmental risks. And thirdly, putting those climate solutions in a competitive process with a selection panel for them to shortlist in climate solutions that can be further enhanced, that can be fostered. And the winning solutions received seed funding, mentorship, and access to networking. And it is an ongoing process. And we look forward to sharing this experience next week at the COP27 climate talks in Egypt. So this is just two examples that I would like to share that we've had in other projects. And we really think about, research, implementing, and really learning from the communities on the ground and building a community of different alliances. And I would like to invite everyone to join the alliances that we're building for a continued collaboration in empowering women and youth in innovation and green entrepreneurship, together with the different partners who we're working with in this project. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much. And I wish I was there in person. And I'd like to insist also on the question of education that was raised today and strengthening those capacities, because we know we as women would not be having this conversation today had our mothers, for example, my mother is seated with you today, cheering me on in the room. I wish I was there with all of you. If there was not that investment in education, we all would not be here today working to strengthen the capacities of other women. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grace Colley. We are still running out of time. At this juncture, we open up for deliberations, and I'm going to only taking 5 speakers. Each will be given 3 minutes, and please stick to the time, stick to your agenda without wasting time. And I remember pretty well, there was an honorable member, my sister from South Africa. You said you're going to deliberate on this topic. You may start, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Lucia. My name is Grace Tseke, the Member of Parliament in South Africa. The South African government has structured their programs in a way that is responding to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly our Goal 5, which seeks to achieve gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. We have continued to intensify our efforts to enhance skills and capabilities of women, especially in our rural areas, but we must accept that much more still needs to be done. South Africa has also adopted various domestic institutional mechanisms aimed at advancing women empowerment across all state functions. Our constitution is one of them which is founded on the principles of human dignity for all, equality and non-racialism and non-sexism. The National Development Plan also, which is a Vision 2030, the Basic Employment Condition of Employment Act, wherein it provides for measures to improve lives of the vulnerable workers, such as domestic workers, as well as the provision of minimum wage to our workers. The Preferential Procurement Policy Framework, which provides a framework for measures in favor of women, black people, and persons with disabilities in procurement processes. Recently, our President also has signed into law the Criminal Law Amendment Act and the amendment on the Domestic Violence Act. South Africa has introduced initiatives to empower women through also the establishment of the Department of Women, Children, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, which is mandated to promote women's socio-economic empowerment and development. Also, we have established the Commission on Gender Equality, which is responsible for which is a Chapter 9 institution mandated to promote, protect, and monitor and evaluate gender equality. Also, through our multi-party women's caucus in Parliament, we have successfully advocated for the removal of the VAT, the value-added tax on sanitary pads, since 2019. I think this must be applauded. Through other government spheres, South Africa is also implementing a range of other women empowerment initiatives, which include provision of social grants and a number of economic initiatives by government departments, including the Department of Trade and Industry, the Department of Small Businesses, and the Department of Agriculture. Lastly, Chair, Madam Lucia, effective implementation of laws and programs by the state organs, coupled with effective oversight by legislative and oversight bodies, are likely to yield positive results which will benefit us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable. For correction, Madam Lucia, the second place is not with us. Your own truly Honorable Victoria Kingston, I'm chairing now from Malawi. So take note of that. The second is Honorable Miriam Shonya from Zambia.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and all protocols observed. Indeed, it's refreshing to sit in this conference room and listen to this whole women talk about gender equality and women empowerment. But I must say, Madam Chair, that this talk, as far as I'm concerned, has been going on for too long a time. So that by now, we shouldn't even have been talking about celebrating small gains. We should have been talking about celebrating big gains that we as women should have made by now in as far as representation is concerned. Of course, I want to acknowledge the strides, that have been made here and there, and maybe I should also seize this opportunity actually to congratulate our Vice President of Zambia, Mrs. Nalumango, who has been recognized as one of the 100 influential women, on the continent of Africa. My contention, Chair, is that, these wheels that are intended to move towards gender equality are actually moving too slowly, politically, whether economically, and in all the other, sectors. When we talk about women empowerment, when are we going to get to a situation where we get to hear now of women that would have made it in the manner that we hear of the Dangotes of this world? Is it that the media is not doing justice in profiling, some of the successful women economically, politically that we have around the continent, so that, more women are motivated? Even as I'm saying that, I know that there are enough women out there that can even fill up the entire auditorium, this conference room, if, whatever we are doing was good enough to facilitate the representation at such various levels. But what is it that we are not doing right as a continent and as a world that has, caused women to remain lagging behind? We are talking about state reporting here. when those reports have been done, what follow-up actions are done to ensure that countries are not slugging, back again into poor representation of women. Giving an example of my own country, we had gone somewhere up to 30%. We are almost there. But now we've gone back almost to 15% of representation of women at the parliamentary level. So what should those mechanisms be doing to sustain the little gains that would have made, so that, we are not moving 10 steps ahead and then we roll back another 15 steps backwards. So for me, at the end of this conference, one of the key resolutions should really be about finding what will be compelling for our national governments to ensure, that gender representation does not remain an aspect of lip service as it has been, because indeed our own development agenda cannot be achieved without the full participation of women. We all appreciate, that fact. And I like what our Papa President yesterday said in his commentary, that we've used the terms like gender mainstreaming, all those beautiful terms around gender, but with very little to show for it when it comes to positions of decision making. So let us indeed put our heads together so that we see women ascending in genuine terms to where they should be, whether in the boardroom, whether in the political space, whether in the economic, agenda, because we are all created, like our main folk, and we have also got the capacity, to perform in all these areas. And so therefore, we should no longer see it as something that the men should favor us with, but something which we can make noise about, so that indeed we are ahead. After all, we are the majority voters. Yesterday, we also had an encouragement from our colleague from South Sudan, who was saying, as women, we can make that noise, which will make us, be recognized. And when we do that and put aside our diplomacy, then people will indeed hear our voices as women. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable. I stand to be guided. All the speakers who have submitted their papers, they want to speak on the roles of women in promotion of good governance. But the topic which we are discussing is about legal, regulatory and policy framework that advance women employment and investment opportunities. So let's do it like this. Do you have anybody from the floor who want to participate, to speak or to question on this topic which we are discussing now? Because the laws of women, we've already done that topic already. Now we are on a different topic. Anyone want to ask a question? Okay. And when you're filling in the papers, please, you should indicate which topic, because all these forms that you're indicating on the roles of women in the promotion, which we've done this already. This we have done, yes. Okay, so we have Honorable Saka Nakawaji Asinga Isali from Chad. You may take the floor. 3 minutes, please. 3 minutes.
C'est ici. OK. C'est Madame Seka Nartamadi.
Madame Seka Mati Isabel from the National Council of Chad. Thank you very much. I would just like to make a small contribution on this theme, because we have a big role to play in terms of employment and investment. We cannot act on a large scale currently, But if I think of my sisters involved in agriculture and the informal sector, there is a lot that can be done. Many women are creating small, medium, and micro enterprises, and this to put food on the table and feed their families. And I was wondering if the Pan-African Parliament could make an inventory of all the different laws and regulations in various different countries to facilitate the participation of women in agriculture and small business. And if we had such a list, we would be able to share the information with our sisters in various countries so that we can learn from good practices. And we can try to do the same in our countries and try to see how we can get our government to follow the same sort of project and to also ensure that whatever projects have been undertaken in the field of women in agriculture, women in small business are sustainable and that they continue in over time. And smaller projects can become bigger projects if they are shared and if they are undertaken by several different groups of women within a country or on the continent itself. And in my country, we organized women.
Thank you so much. I think your 3 minutes has gone. Who else want to deliberate? Can I have 2 more? Then we can close this chapter. Yes, let me start by, may you please introduce you, I don't have your name, so you stand, introduce yourself and take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. My name is Mashabela Renee from South Africa. Chair, in many cases in the continent, it is women who are the objects and ultimate victims of bad governance. From struggles for efficient sexual health provision to struggles for access to land and water for rural women, almost all the bad governance decisions taken by our leaders in the continent ultimately affect the well-being of women. Chair, in the entire continent today, there are few women heads of states. Heads of states are dominated by men. It is time for us to intensify our oversight and monitoring, especially in corporate areas where leadership positions are dominated by men. There must be penalties for those countries which failed to empower women, especially young women. Again, there must be a certain percentage for women leadership and must be non-negotiable. Lastly, Chair, women are in majority in the entire continent. Let us use our majority to support each other in key leadership positions instead of putting men in those positions of power. Thank you, Chair.
So, I'd already recognized one member from this side. Yes, ma'am. You say your name and 3 minutes, then we close.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm from Ethiopia. My name is Lomi. I thank you, Honorable Chairperson. I thank you also, all presenters. I wanted to give you something about my country's women representation. For example, if you take member of ministers, 15% of the ministers are women. Director of the electoral board is woman, and the Supreme Court president is woman. The state president is woman. So we have to work more on those issues. Having said this, I have one question. What is the specific challenges in implementing laws and policies in empowering women and the youngest in economic sector? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. At this juncture, allow me to give each presenter 2 minutes. Sorry, you forgive us. We are running out of time to wind up. We may start with Your Excellency, Madam Monteiro. Thank you.
Boa tarde novamente. Good afternoon. This is only to thank the share of the information on the respective ideas. And I also would like to thank the participation you are having here. This is the first time I'm coming to the South Africa. I was very curious to be here in the Parliament, Pan-African Parliament. And I wish that we continue to work together and so that we can see this continent, his diversity, and also include the islands who makes part of this great continent. And all us will be, we have much more strength so that we can project also the women and the youth, and also the youth women, they have some so that we can project this continent regarding the aims we have to put in place. Thank you very much.
Madam Marie Providence Mugago, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, esteemed members of Parliament, for sharing your perspectives on the best way to economically empower women. I would like to take this opportunity to answer the question of the last speaker about the challenges of implementation of laws and regulations that seek to empower women. One point is that most AU member states do not move beyond the domestication process, which means that you ratify an agreement, but you actually don't come up with a robust implementation plan of the agreement that has been ratified. Another point is the fact that women are only engaged as beneficiaries of these legal instruments. But I believe that it's also important to engage them at the point of inception, where they actually share their perspectives into the challenges that they are facing, and also finding ways, brainstorming on solutions with them. And most importantly, involve them in the implementation process. They have to be active roles in the implementation of policies that affect them. Allow me to thank Madam Chair for giving me the opportunity to address the Pan-African Parliament today as well. This is my first time as well, so it's been an honor to listen to my mothers and my big sisters about some of the key issues that actually affect me as well. And I hope that we can continue the debate, and that, yes, as much as the small wins should not be celebrated, I think that we still need to celebrate them and look into putting more effort into improving the lives of young women, of young people, and of women generally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we move on to Madam Margaret Corey from Germany.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Chair. To the remarks about the inclusion of women, I think one of the key areas would be to really ensure the element of, when we're introducing different legislation and also regulatory measures, from the inception, as the previous speaker said, we need to include women in the different levels, in the inception stage, in the implementation phase, in the regulatory phases. It needs to be a transformational process and not bringing them in from only at one specific level. It is also quite important for us to be intentional, and the intentionality comes with, from such convening processes, which, as a previous speaker said, we could fill up this room. There are women who want to engage in this process, but we know there are certain challenges, which is the second point on financing. And it is quite important for us to be intentional, to look at what are the resources that are needed to support women participation, and may we be ambitious in that regard. And just to close off is to say, we women are stewardesses. We're stewardesses of our environment, of our communities, and we play a very central role that needs to be celebrated, that needs to be harnessed, and it also needs to be well endowed with resources if we're going to see change tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Allow me to thank all presenters and all members who took floor. And last, may we give them another round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Honorable members, at this juncture, we are going to close for lunch. Lunch will be saved. I'm sure you've been given some coupons. No. We start with just session. Which one?
Yeah, I see.
Sorry, honorable members, I have a proposal. There's one other session before we go for lunch. So, can I propose we finish this session, then we go for lunch later? A yes or a no? We finish the other session, we go lunch after this session. Okay, thank you so much. I now call the Vice President, Honorable Randa Muhammadi, to take up this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, honorables. Now we will move to the third session before lunch, which will be about women and youth in leadership positions. May I call Mrs. Shido Bimba? Mrs. Shido Bimba? And Mrs. Shido, the speaker, and Mrs. Cataligo Sikop, and Honorable Sifiso Sami Dob. Sifiso Sami Dob. Hello, you are Cataligo? May I call Mr. Shido Mbemba? Where are the speakers? Oh. And Sifiso-Sami Dubi. Sifiso-Sami Dubi. So, one last time, may I call Mr. Shidu Bemba and Sifi Susami Dubi. So, Sifi Susami, have a seat. May I call Mr. Shidu Bemba? Okay, so let's start. So our session now will be about women and youth in leadership position, with equal representation of women and men in most elected official positions, equal participation and women and girls in all leadership and decision-making positions, gender parity and youth quota, equal representation of women and youth in leadership, and the implementation of AU Agenda 2063. So let me invite Mrs. Kataligu Sikop. She will give us, she is a policy officer, Women, Gender and Youth Directorate, African Union Commission. You have the floor, you have the mic for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Allow me to stand on all protocols, and good morning to you all. As mentioned, my name is Katlego Sekube, and I'm a policy officer from the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate. I will speak about the equal representation of women and men in most elected official positions, but mostly on the equal participation of women and girls in all leadership and decision-making, and then gender parity and youth quotas, which is our work primarily within the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate. But first of all, it's an honor and a privilege to be here as a young person, as a young woman, in the presence of women leaders. It's an honor. I don't think I'll forget this. It's my first time as well, like Marie Providence as well. I don't take this opportunity for granted, and it's something I'll learn from. But let me start off by saying also, yesterday our Honorable President mentioned the fact that women involvement and inclusion in governance is the solution to our governance problem. There are several possible solutions, but I think we all stand testament to the fact that being included in governance has led to many positive changes and has led to the development of and empowerment of women and youth in many ways because of our inclusion here. It's something worth noting, and it's something that we should continue to take forward in all our plans. Let me go to a few of the legal and policy frameworks that the African Union has adopted, and decisions that they've taken and adopted over the past couple of years that speak to women inclusion and women participation and their parity and representation in leadership and decision making. So we have the AU Constitutive Act, we have the modalities of elections and officials, we have the staff rules and regulations, which applies mostly to the African Union and its hiring and recruitment and just, those policies. We have the 2009 gender policy, but I'll speak about the three main ones today, which have been alluded to in previous conversations, which is the Maputo Protocol, the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa, as well as the African Union Strategy for Gender Equality in Africa. We all know about them, so I won't dwell too much on them, but I'll speak particularly about Article 9 of the Maputo Protocol. Now, Article 9 speaks on the right to participation in the political and decision-making processes, right? It says that parties shall take specific action to promote participative governance and the equal participation of women in the political life of their countries through affirmative action, enabling legislation, national legislation, and other measures to ensure that women participate without any discrimination, right? Without any discrimination at all levels, and that women are represented equally with men in electoral processes. Next, I'll just talk about the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa. My colleague spoke about it yesterday, and she mentioned that for the 2021 period, we had only 16 member states submit their reports. That's a very discouraging number, but I think you all are here today, and I hope that when you go back home, when you go back to your jurisdictions, you'll be able to encourage to encourage reporting, more consistent reporting on the frameworks that we have, on the reports that we require, that we are obliged to report on. So, Article 5 of the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa speaks on the gender parity principle. And this seeks to expand and promote the gender parity principle that has been adopted regarding the Commission of the African Union to all the organs of the African Union, including its NEPAD program, the regional economic communities, and to the national and local levels, in collaboration with political parties and national parliaments in our countries. So these policies and frameworks that we have cannot work in isolation. They rely on our member states and our national legislature to use them and to adopt them, really, and implement them. Lastly, I'll speak about the African Union Strategy for Gender Equality in Africa, which is we all know about it as well, the 2018 to 28 one. It was launched at the AU Summit in February 2019, and it's transformational in that its outcomes aim to mitigate, if not possible, eliminate the major constraints hindering gender equality and women's empowerment. Now, Pillar 4 of the strategy focuses on leadership, voice, and visibility. This pillar recognizes that for women to have a voice, they need to be equally represented in all areas of decision-making and be able to participate with impact through the removal of all forms of barriers. Right, so those are the main articles that a few of the frameworks and articles that we have that speak to women representation and participation in leadership and decision-making roles within our union. So, Agenda 2063, sorry about that. Agenda 2063, which is the blueprint and master plan of the Africa we want, puts youth and gender equality at the forefront of the continent's vision as it seeks an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, right? Especially its women and youth, and caring for children through ensuring gender equality and parity in all spheres of life. So, the African Union recognizes the youth population as a critical resource towards the development of the continent and seeks to empower younger generations to be resilient and advocates of change towards addressing the challenges that they continue to face on the road to the Africa we want. So I said I'd speak about how the African Union, or which policies the African Union implements that incorporate women and youth. Now, in 2018, at the 30th Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union, a decision was made and adopted by member states to achieve full gender parity in the institutions and organs of the Union. Furthermore, a decision was adopted to ensure demographic equity by having 35% of staff under the age of 35 by 2025. Did we get that? We would want to have 35% of staff under the age of 35 to be in the AU workforce. Now, these decisions provide a unique opportunity to positively and gradually shift the AU to becoming a preferred organization for African women, youth, and families. Now, the way we wish to implement this decision, and we have been in the past, is through the African Union Gender Parity and Youth Quotas by 2025 project, right? Now, this project or initiative, the overall objective of the initiative is to achieve gender parity, that's 50%, and youth equity in the institutions and organs of the AU through creating conducive and inclusive and genuine support for women's and youth empowerment. I'm a product of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years. I wasn't there when the decision was made, but I can testify to the fact that work is being done to ensure that women are youth and youth are represented in the AU, and that we see more and more youth being taken on within the AU. Now, this project is at AU level, but we do hope that it will be implemented at member state level. So how have we implemented the project? It's through and under the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate, which is where I am, but it's also with the Human Resource Department in the AU, with the Legal Council, with HR focal points in departments, and just ministries of youth and gender. The framework is yet to be launched. It's yet to be launched, but it will be shared as usual with our member states and all other relevant stakeholders and just within the AU. So what do we want to, what does the initiative seek to do, and how do we seek to do this? We would review the recruitment policies to affirm gender parity and youth quotas. I heard some of our honorable speakers speak today about quotas and how maybe perhaps we shouldn't be focusing too much on having quotas, but I think it's important that we continue to have quotas because they help us to monitor and evaluate our progress, and they keep us working towards something. If we don't continue to have those quotas, I think it would be difficult to track our progress, and it would be, like I said, we wouldn't have something to work towards, and we wouldn't have the same goal. But, you know, if we need to continue having quotas in that regard. We also would seek to mainstream gender and youth development in policies, programs, and people across the AU establishments and in interdepartmental reporting mechanisms. We also seek to support member states and RECs to implement gender and youth development mainstreaming at national levels. So once the framework has been launched, we'll be able to come up with and assist member states at national level with country acceleration strategies on how to best implement this gender parity and youth quotas by 2025 project. It would be remiss of me not to talk about women empowerment, women and youth empowerment, and not talk about and just talk about quotas and not talk about women empowerment, women and youth empowerment, because the two go hand in hand. The more women and youth are financially and economically included and empowered, the more emancipated they would be, the more resources they would have that enable them to take part and to take part in these leadership positions. Now, what do we as member states need to do? We need to ensure that the necessary laws on gender parity and women's involvement in government are implemented within our countries. We, member states, are the implementing parties with the African Union and with other agencies and support, but I think member states really need to take up these and implement these policies and frameworks. We also need to report more. We already said that for 2021 we had only 16 member states reporting, but I think with all our frameworks, with all our protocols, it's important that we report. Even as the African Union, we are able to track progress and we're able to assess and assist where necessary based on the reports that we receive. So if we don't report, it would be difficult to see which member states need to implement more or which ones aren't doing that that well. Yes, but overall, we also need to work with other frameworks and other programs that speak to women's financial and economic inclusion and empowerment that will, as a result, enable women and youth participation and representation in leadership. I will stop there for now, but thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Kataligu Sikoba. And now we will be with Ms. Sifososami Dubi, WPP Program Officer, International IDEA.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. May I start with saying all protocols observed. I don't want to stand in between your lunch, so I'll be quite quick. I've got a PowerPoint which is showing on the screen, but I will run through it quite quickly. Hopefully it will be shared amongst all honorable members. Honorable members, Africa's Agenda 2063 commits to improving women's political participation through Aspiration 3 on Africa's good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. This aspiration embeds a culture of gender equality and good governance, and it is making it necessary to have an inclusive democracy in the continent through inclusion of women, and in particular, young women and women with disabilities. The Africa we want is one where women have equal opportunities to participate in all levels of political decision-making without hindrance, without fear, and with full support. I will then go to my PowerPoint, but just to introduce that the organization I am representing is International IDEA, working on democracy across the world. Our offices are in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as well as in Kenya. That is the Africa and West Asia region. As International IDEA, we produce knowledge products as well as advocacy and capacity building, working with parliaments, working with political parties, working with women's organizations, as well as working with local government institutes and regional economic communities to provide an input in democracy and make sure that all